Greetings, ladies and mental gents, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of stories from across the internet. In this series, we'll be focusing on a web novel called There Is No Epic Lucha, Only Puns, from the website ReUpload. And in this video, we'll be doing chapters 87 to 89. I hope that you enjoy. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 87, Grotesque Puns. Rudy rested her form against what could only be another inner gate-like door. You'd almost think that these cult blokes and their monsters didn't want people raiding their stuff. Shame about that. Rudy was feeling rather neighborly. Not that she had much strength left to swing a dirty look, let alone a well-balanced sword at her side. The forces had just kept coming, to the point that even when her demon blood boiling, she couldn't keep the onslaught up for too much longer. The thought that she'd done well, though, the sheer amount of bodies that hit the floor would have given new meaning to what her mum would consider messy. That was when that nasally undead prick screamed so loudly that everything just stopped. A black cloud of energy with a face that could have been the captain's rushed past and vanished through the cracks of the door that she was now resting against. Delta and Fran had done the trick. Hard to imagine that soft-looking lass being anything mean, but that was the kind of person Rudy avoided teasing too much. Nice ones and all of that. They all really blew a gasket when pushed too far, and being a dungeon just made it even more likely that weird things would happen. Rudy managed to raise her head long enough to see the few skeletons standing still, while some fell apart bone by bone as the minutes ticked by. Their glowing eyes flickered and faded as the soul energy was sucked back into the ground and floors. Good thing, too, because her fingers dropped the sword and even that was too much for her. Rudy grimaced. If she saw her now, he'd laugh so hard and Rudy would burst a chakra point just to stand up and deck him in the jaw for it. Then again, if Quiz was here, Rudy wouldn't have minded the backup. One of the more animated-looking skeletons turned his head and shuffled towards her, bony fingertips gleaming. Frag off. If I get knocked off by a bag of bones, I'll be annoyed. You're just really a naked person. I want to at least get my head crushed in by a dragon or some stuff. Rudy spat. There wasn't enough life or awareness left in the thing other than the undead's desire to kill her. Rudy began to push herself up, ignoring the deep stains that she left on the door. Damn lucky bite on that side from the goat with fangs. Like Von's dog, it was a creature that didn't need those fangs or a desire for the blood, but this place was frecked up. She reached down, fingers shaking, for the sword, and she almost fell to her knees. Her blood, demon blood, too busy filtering out the various poisons that she had been injected with. It was just as bad as the damn cold, making her body weak and feverish. It was amazing that after everything Rudy fought, the damn common cold was the only foe keeping up with her. The bunny bastard exploded as one of the 9 doors opened, and the kobold from before stood there. You look like something Jeb chewed on and spat out, the lizard commented. It was sweet music to Rudy's ears. She just almost sensed a fellow lover of the dry wit and sarcasm. He looked around and his jolly mood seemed to stutter for a moment. I haven't seen this room in, about 70 years, he mused. He was kicked forward as the feminine frog from before marched in. Rudy hadn't met the frog folks of the second floor properly yet, but it was on her list. This monster reminded her of Dabergast, if Dabergast hadn't taken her issues out on various deforesting companies and litter bugs. A type of small gremlin with too many legs that loved spreading as much of a mess as they could in the green places of the world. 30? 50, now 70. Can you please stay consistent? The woman demanded. She was covered in some thick, slimy red goop. Davina, don't just be mad because you jammed up in the fight. Swar grunted with amusement. Rudy had never been so happy to see so many non-humans in her life. It was a blood elemental gone past its due date. It attacked me. The woman glared at Swar. Rudy could smell the old blood now that she focused. No one seemed to meet her eyes, but Rail, the monstrously buff frog, in what seemed to be swim shorts, spoke. You did great. It exploded, and you stomped the jam blob's core so hard that it began to cry. You're truly an impressive warrior, my fellow frog. He coughed and slapped Davina hard on the back. Well, at least Inchy is leaving me alone, Davina mumbled. Everyone paused and long looked back into the kitchen where the tiny shrill voice chanted endless jokes at a sobbing elemental core. If Rudy was following the conversation right. Hey, sorry to be a bother, but don't suppose any of you know some non-holy healing magic? I kinda wasted all of my energy doing cool tricks with the sword. Also, where's Delta? She slumped back down onto the ground. A bit annoyed, she let the fashion plane show. Davina frowned, and her annoyed expression turned calm and focused as she came closer to peer at Rudy's back. Swar twirled his staff with a dark smile. I can seal the wound, but you'll be cooked for a while, he offered. Rudy was about to retort when she hissed as Davina prodded her wounds with a glowing green finger. You're injured. Rail, use those muscles for something other than being distracting and help Miss Rudy to the core room. It'll be easier for her body to recover away from the cursed touch of this place. She ordered. Rudy glared at her. I can handle myself. I need no man to lift. She began, and Davina smacked her on the nose with a finger. Child, I swear to Mother that I will seal your mouth shut with the dried blood goop if I have to. This has been a very tiring day for me. Shush, and let me help you. The frog growled back. Rudy bristled and then mumbled that she felt that Trail would lift her with ease. I'm sure I'm older than you by quite a lot of years, she said finally. Davina merely raised her version of a brow. And I dare say that you will have to start acting like it, Miss Rudy, the frog replied waspishly. Rudy couldn't retort to that, so she turned to Rail. I think she needs some tadpoles to Mother. Get on that, will you? She said, and Davina's choking noises were like honey. Swar cackled with just the cherry on the top. Rudy smirked, and her eyes fell once, then twice, and then the cold aura leaving her body. She blinked with exhaustion up at the orange-sized core of Delta. It acted like the setting sun, and it made Rudy's skin feel warm. She looked down to see some giant goblin laying Delta's sleeping avatar down on the ground while Rail placed Rudy next to it. Is she okay? She mumbled. The goblin peered at her, and she stared, and finally saw that it was Fran the boss. He looked bigger. Yes. She channeled her mana, that she gathered, eager to consume the feast hall, into me instead. It will take a day or so for the dungeon to take over the hall now. But Mother pieced me back together at the last moment. It took a toll on her. Fran frowned. He kneeled and, to Rudy's surprise, rushed Delta's hair out of her eyes. She risks far too much for us, but we do the same for her. Fran smiled. Rail nodded seriously. I'll break anyone who makes her cry. Rail agreed. Rudy snorted. It's not that sexy to be a bunch of mama's boys, she mumbled, and Delta shifted and her hand was close to Rudy's. Warm heat radiated off of it, and then Delta's face began to twitch as she was having a bad dream. Rudy took the hand, and after a few seconds of real physical contact, so real and human, Delta's hand phased through her own, and the avatar turned blurry and hard to see once more. But the peace that Delta got from that another contact was enough to make Rudy feel better. She closed her own eyes. Being so close to the dungeon core was the best medicine for a demon could get. Dungeons took mana from the area and people, made it into potent and purified mana before filtering it back into the world. Demons didn't have mana, not like people from the deep world. They were more easily affected by dungeons than humans. But the dungeons couldn't take anything from them. It was unfair. Rudy didn't want to be unfair to her dungeon. She began to hum a stupid tune, like the one her mum sang for her when she was scared by the demon horns that sprouted from her head when she was just a young girl. The Claws, her father, who looked so scary at the young Rudy. That song followed her here to this moment, and it slipped out with little care. Rudy hummed and hummed. Delta, shaken, breathing soothed and became deep and gentle. She never saw Rael leave, and Fran settled in as his pig to guard them both. Just as the demon princess and a dungeon core and a pig knight. Nothing odd here. Rudy smiled, and sleep took her over. Fran watched as his mother and Rudy slept, his form shrinking slowly, as the power left him. Soon he would be back in his base form, and then he would diminish more if he did not return to his boss room. But for now he had time. He sat on the pulsing light of the mother's core, guarding and watching, both against the deeper evils of the place and the gleaming sword leaning against the wall that appeared between one blink and another. This thing seemed to share the feeling of Fran had, of guarding something, and Fran let his fellow protector stay. For now. He petted Bacon, who let Mother rest against his soft underbelly like a giant snoring pillow. Fran closed his eyes and touched his chest where something odd now rested. A core of some kind. A tiny orb of Mother herself and himself. It rested just below his chest, and it felt like a trapped bird slowly resting. The fluttering wings it had been during battle, now resting, and the glow of the core washing over him. This was his mother's gift to Fran, and he would protect it. He felt the warmth from the thing, and he smiled to himself, as Mother's manner seemed to coax something new from his object. A source of manner that reminded Fran of clashing metal and pigs. It reminded Fran of Fran. Jack inhaled and exhaled. The black fountain in the middle of this dark garden had stopped spluttering the gunk that flowed from the inner rooms of this place. He had been here. He couldn't guess how long ago, despite how much he liked to pretend he hadn't lost awareness of his time and existence. He wanted to believe. He prayed that it had only been a few years, but his graying scales and loose sanity told him otherwise. His friends, his home, his wife. Every scratch of the day mark on the bare walls felt like a win for Jack, until he finally noticed how the place kept restoring the days. How many had been stolen from him. How many marks were lost to the blind Jack. He had vandalized books for journals, but the passage unwrote themselves. He tried to scar his own arms with marks, but after so many years, even he too began to revert. Then one day, he just stopped, and he lost. And then he woke up one day and remembered. He turned, and there was an almighty boom, as the fountain exploded from one of its bubbling bottles. He laughed with joy. Things were changing. The fountain was going to remain rubble. The rubble would turn to dust, and the dust would be a memory. Change. Unstoppable change. It was beautiful. You're a little mad, but he mused. Jack grinned. Nonsense, I'm totally sane. I just forgot about it for a while, he promised. This didn't get him a relieved looks of trust like Jack had hoped for, but he had time to work on that. Actual moving time. It was enough to make a lizard cry. So, when Miss Hero gets up, we've got to choose what to go after next. You got here through the kitchen, so that leaves the 7 offshoots of the main party. Jack looked around the inner garden. Everything had always felt fake about this place, but Jack could see something now. The plants began to move and grow. The roots still looked blighted, and their blossoms tainted from the black sludge of the fountains it spewed. He grimaced at the rapidly fading black stains as the ground swallowed it up. Hero wasn't going to enjoy that. Jack hadn't enjoyed it when he had been forced to drink it. Liquid nightmares it was. Even after all these years, he had never quite made it to the innermost rooms where the black ooze flowed from. And, if Jack had to admit it, he didn't even get close. He was just one lizard and one of the bombs with a screw-it attitude. But now, Jack had support in the form of the weirdest people that he had ever met. Excellent, Jeb. The troll was pretty normal for a troll. So, what's in the other rooms? Billy, the archer, asked. The goblin smelled of sweet, tangy fumes, his quiver and bouquet of scents and promises of great pain. Jack pointed to the door before randomly picking another door with his other hand. About that ways we got a resting quarters. Lots of dusty beds and dust rabbits. Skeletons, of course. Over yonder is a ballroom, more like an arena the last time I saw it. That way has lots of weird mages huddled around and exploding potions, or screaming things in tubes. Jack paused to shake off the bad memory of wandering into that room in a panic during one of his escape attempts. How bad was it? Davina asked, her usual nagging tone now soft like honey. Jack shrugged. I killed most of the things early on. Managed to get a lot of the poor buggers before the revert set in. Didn't make me popular with the mages. He managed to push the generic smile out. Davina wasn't buying it. Being a contract monster wasn't so bad. He spent most of his new life in the outside of Delta space. To be honest, other than the new gear, he honestly couldn't feel the difference. But the monsters around him all remained quiet, respectful to him. Jack was a little freaked out to sentient monsters and some third-level dame, but to be honest, talking to Delta was enough to let him know that this ain't no normal dungeon. The mushroom theme was interesting, if nothing else. He breathed in. I'd like to go back to that room, leave it to the resident arson expert. He nodded to Swar, who gave him a serious nod back. They just understood each other on a level. That level was the screaming of the inflammable idiots of the world, but it was still the legit connection of a friendship. The next up would be the menagerie. Think of a petting zoo, but the animals pet you. Jack pointed to a slightly melted door. Lots of beasties that had the woman and thorns sliced up had come back from there. Do you know if she's got a lover? A fling. My heart is still pumping, seeing the beasts who chewed me alive get turned into puree, and I think I have a crush. Jack asked, pretty sure that he was serious, but he couldn't trust Jack. Damn Kobold was madder than a hat. I think she'd break you by accident. Num pointed out. Jack shivered, but his grin got under control. Last two, I think, is a basic storage, with one being a disposal area. Jack finished. His tone had become clipped. Rael, who had not returned, peered at the two doors. Why do you sound more upset about those than the potential nightmare laboratory? Swan asked bluntly. Jack shifted, trying not to think of the exact reasons. That area. It's just a hole for dumping things they unearth deeper down. They get some miners and skeleton crews constantly, trying to relink the different forts. Jack began to fidget. He really didn't want to think of the exact reason which was upsetting him. This don't think of stuff was harder in practice than in theory. Jack's eyes darted about in need of a quick distraction. Does Delta pay? Do I get holidays? He suddenly asked, and everyone blinked. Pay? Swar echoed. You know, for our services and company. Do we get pocket change? Jack added. She gives us the life force to exist and the protection from being eroded by the world's mana. She made us and let us exist as people. And you want pay? Davina asked blankly. Jack looked down. Well, when you put it that way. Yes, I exist very much on my own, thank you. And, well, I haven't been employed for about 100 years, he said with an embarrassed laugh. Davina's foot impacted into his face, and Jack was reminded that frog folk, even lovely figures like Davina, had very big feet. Stop increasing the number of years, she snarled. We get to annoy folks and free drinks. I get paid enough. So I agreed with Davina. I get to swim her. Rail flexed. Jack blinked up at the dark ceiling. He was smiling. He felt alive. That's when Swar's words finally registered. Free drinks. He shot up, and so fast that he swore that his bomb was under his tail. He wanted free drinks over stupid shiny pieces of metal. As the monsters took up guard positions around the room, waiting for Delta to awaken, Jack worked on forgetting all about the thing that was upsetting him. The disposal room, which hosted the MTI, which was an unnecessarily fancy name for a single hole where dirt and trash was thrown in and fell until it fell out the bottom of the world and into the silence below. Jack forgot all about the fact that he had been forced to stare into the darkness, and it had stared back. Jack didn't blink. He simply plotted with Swar and planned with Davina. Jack felt real again, and he was going to be double-plucked, damned, if he would let some memory of something he couldn't remember take that way again. Delta rested under the watchful eye of the shrinking Fran. Her mana finally took the first steps into the feast hall, finding no barrier this time. The mana slunk forward. It was a hive of tiny orange particles. It was a glorious mana of Delta. It took a lost ball of dust and a web of converted it. Victory. The first of many. It urged itself to convert more things for Delta. It came across a large flow, a chair, a terrible adversary, but they attacked all 4 legs at once and broke it down to be added to the collective. The war of the feast hall was going according to plan. What the plan entailed exactly was not as important as the great and amazing Delta's conquest, who the manor thought very highly of. They rapidly attacked the table, and it bowed and fell to their mighty manor chompers. The room was weak, and it would fall to the mighty Deltaverse. The manor was quite sure that it was changing room, and if it left behind was no concern to it. The fabled system had taken effect, but the manor did not care for the puppet strings that the system pulled. It was here for only one thing: victory. Another table fell to its purposes. Then it began to climb the walls. Nowhere to hide. All would fall to Delta. They stopped for a quick break and idly nibbled on the wall slime and talked about the manor-related things like converting and Delta. It was a very philosophical discussion, and ended in manner reaching the ceiling with a renewed eagerness. In the deep shadows of the ceiling were countless shapes. Manor paused. This was different, not slimes or evil chairs. These shapes were rough. It covered one, and it took time to break down, and even then they tasted lots of new things. The manor reared back with a hint of resistance. A challenge. The manor attacked, but the immobile object didn't do much, but the manor knew that it was screaming for mercy. No mercy, only glory. For Delta. Delta snored and Rudy matched her, like a violin being backed by a cello. A nervous menu box appeared, and New, who was floating nearby, turned and began to laugh. Oh, this'll be good. New's text rang with a familiar laughter. You have consumed 10 or more gargoyle comatose. Gargoyles are now available as a monster on the 3rd floor. Delta turned in asleep, unaware of her various forces at work. In endurance, a boy stopped sweeping. He turned slowly on the spot before he looked down at the shiny shoes. You seem bothered by something. A deeper voice called from the workstation on the one side of the room. Vass eyed his master with a frown. Master Japes, I felt like something is calling to me. This feels silly, but like family just appeared and then vanished. Fellow children of the stone and earth. Vass closed his eyes for a moment. Under his shirt he could file a kaleidoscope of rainbow colors that shined. Japes appeared and put her hand on Vass's shoulder, stopping the glow. Do not wear your heart in your sleeve. It belongs to me, after all. Japes smiled, and in the human one instead of a normal face-splitting one. I know, but it's been getting harder to control now that Miss Delta is growing. Like I'm being filled up, he complained childishly. Master Japes merely patted his head, making the cap go askew. Then do your best to go spend some of that energy. It's a nice day. Why don't you go find that child, Dio, and go on an adventure? Japes clapped his hands. Vass looked up at the Potter Durance in despair. Go outside. Be around people. I'd much rather stand still in a garden. Vass protested, but he blinked and found himself outside of the front door with his master closing the door. No sass. Be a good child and go be a child. I shall be gone for a day, and I've turned on the wards so you can't sneak in through the window. Have fun. I have a lot to do with the samples I got from the spider domain. Shame had exploded, but this is Durance. The cheerful, evil voice of Vass's master called before the door slammed shut. Vass stared at the sunshine and the passing animated people, at the very town coming to life. He turned and began to hammer on the door. I'll be a good golem. Don't make me go outside. He begged, and he felt a chill of something looming up ahead of him. He turned to see the sun beaming down at him. The godly being spoke with the windows rattled. Hi, Vass. Mr. James said you wanted to hang out. I just got a letter a minute ago. It came inside my chocolate egg instead of the toy I was expecting. How did you do that? Dio spoke. Vass smiled weakly. Master Japes is very good at manipulating closed spaces, he said politely, and then said the worst thing that he could have. I can also make some enchanted spaces and such, he humbly bragged. Dio's smile reached his eyes and Vass cursed his master. Silently, deep inside and backwards, just in case his master could hear. Even then, he apologized in his head. I got so many spider bits that I need to hide before my mom searches my closet. Dio carried Vass into the busy life of Durance. Also, you need to meet Kami. She's really nice. Vass prayed that his master would get bored and come home soon. She's with Chris at the bar right now. The other hand, Vass really had not been outside for a while, and it would do his complexion good to soak up some heat. Wyamm watched as Sir and Fran climbed up the stairs and entered a boss room. Such a scene, every fibre of her being protested that this should not be. 2 bosses in one room when they were not part of a pair. It wasn't even like Mother Delta had a boss rush mode. This just felt alien. She opened her mouth, closed it again and tried again. But no words would come. Damn it, she was a boss too, so why was she so flustered around Sir Fran? The first of them all. In so many ways, how could Wyamm even bother to try and live up to that? It was like many folks who would make it past Sir Fran and the jungle to reach her. She just needed an element, but Fran was wonderful. A true boss. May we sit and chat? Sir Fran asked politely. Wyamm cleared the mist with some minor effort and pushed the 2 roundish root knots up for Fran and Mr. Bacon to sit. Mr. Bacon settled down and blinked up at her. What a cute little pig. It was Sir Fran's, so of course it would be cute. How can I help you? Wyamm aimed for a casual calmness and came off as frigid. She wanted to hit herself with a thorny branch, as Fran seemed to hesitate. I want to apologize. Fran began, and Wyamm's mind went blank. Apologize to Wyamm? Had Wyamm with some letter, or maybe Fran, tried to talk to her before? No. Wyamm would have known. She was always hoping to get messages from the other boss when her own 4 monsters did seem to interact with the outside of Luna. That energetic frog was lovely, if not a bit of a child at times. I meant to congratulate you on becoming a fellow boss, and should have asked if you needed help or tips. But thankfully, it seems like that won't be needed. The knight peered around and smiled at her room. Wyamm was glad that she had bark. She felt the sap flowing to her cheeks. You and Mother did a great job. This is a lovely grove for a boss, he praised. Wyamm gave a choked laugh and tried not to look or sound too pleased as she made a nonsense words and smacked Fran lightly in jest. The poor knight was sent flying, and Wyamm felt her world screech as he bounced 3 times. Mr. Bacon watched this, tail wagging as if he was amused. So Fran stood up and stretched. And strong as expected. I feel quite happy, Lady Wyamm. I know that the lower floors are safe under your protection. The knight grinned, a little fang sticking out from his lip, and Wyamm wanted to grow legs and run. Maybe she could. She focused, but all she got was a feeling that her roots coding with nervous glee. I was thinking that perhaps we could start a daily meetings for the bosses that can move. I can come down and we can discuss the issues that only us bosses would feel be important. If that's okay. The knight asked and Wyamm blinked. A meeting for bosses, a union, or a bosses anonymous. It meant spending more time with Sir Fran. I would be fine with that, but do remember to knock. I'm a lady after all. Wyamm tried to look sultry and Fran bowed, missing the look. Perhaps I should sit outside of the room and we can talk from a distance. I do not want you to feel like I'm invading you. Fran mused. No, a waste of time and energy. I shall prepare a meeting table and refreshments. Honey, fruit, rabbit haunches. We shall feast in the glorious success of bloodshed and victory. Wyamm crooned and then froze as she rethought what she just said. Damn it, she had promised Mother Delta not to kill. I would like that. I'll bring fish and booze. Fran agreed with another one of those fanged smiles. He bowed once more. Until next time, Lady Wyamm of the 2nd floor. Sir Fran left, Master Bacon trotting after him. Wyamm gathered her mist and no one could see her smile. And to you, Sir Fran of the 1st floor. Maestro began to play some slow dance music, but Wyamm's frosty glare muted him after a few seconds. End of chapter. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 88, Xanatus Gambit, No, this is the Delta gamble. Delta woke with a scent of dusty castles and blueberries filling her nose. The castle part was easy to understand, but she struggled with the second. Opening two eyes, she was sure that she had been lost in some black thick forest. She moved slightly and was mass wriggling in response. Oh God, she had been eaten by some monster and smelled blueberries. What next? Was its cousin going to come and accusing her of reeking of elderberries? She shot up and blinked as her head left the sea that was Rudy's hair. The woman yawned and grumbled something about skinning knives and chickens. The woman glared at her core with the beady red eyes. You were keeping me warm. Do a girl a favor and float back inside for another few hours. The woman asked politely, as if her request was rather mundane. What happened? I remember Captain Salfudge and Fran. Then I kinda smelled frying magic, and I thought I heard Sis talking. What happened? She asked, looking around, and Davina, who had been sitting there, knitting something from spider silk, looked up. You made Sir Fran more powerful, and he smashed the undead fool before having to go back to his room. Miss Rudy decided to fight the hordes of the nightmares, and only wondered why. That might be a bad idea later, the grog grumbled. I washed my hands afterwards, and it was only one horde, Rudy replied sarcastically. Davina looked up and flicked one hand. A tiny green ball appeared behind Rudy, giggling, before it exploded like a firecracker against the woman's rear. Rudy yelped as Davina pointed and glared. Sassing me is not wise right now. I had to stop Rail and Jib from tossing Jack and his potions like an explosive game of catch, and 3 more creatures tried to get through. One of them sniffed me and died on the spot because the damn blood elemental goop won't come off. Davina scowled, and on her head, Inchy the bird tilted its head and with the beady eyes glimmering. You could see that if one more person annoys her, she's going to deliver a goop to Grace, the bird sang. Rudy burst out in a guffaw, and Davina's pained face turned murderous. Delta had to admit, Davina did smell rather, ripe. She focused, but since Rudy was here, her menu and core powers were highly limited. You don't smell that bad. I've reeked worse, Rudy promised. Davina stared at Rudy, and Delta saw the look ready to cry at that. Instead, the frog woman inhaled and pulled out a round, glowing orb with 3 bands of iron, pulsing of dark red color. Our prisoner of war doesn't speak, but it felt wrong to smash him up when he can't defend himself. I brought him here for your judgment. Also, because I'm sure one of the goblins will dare the others to swallow it whole, Davina said bluntly. The blood goop demon that had soaked Davina looked rather harmless as its core, and Delta watched as Rudy looked at it. The little bugger isn't going anywhere without blood, and decent stuff at that. Smells like it formed a body out of cow blood last time. Explains why it didn't do more than annoy you, Rudy said, and spun the core in a finger. Delta sort of felt the bit of kinship with it, a central power that built itself up by constructing a body and gathering resources. Would she be that helpless if someone took her out of a core room? If we rebuilt it, would it go back to hurting people? Delta raised the first important question. Davina and Rudy shared a long look for a second. Rudy nodded before speaking. Depends on what kind of elemental it is. We know it's blood, but the actual nature we don't know. If it's a golem type, then it's going to be following the last official orders it got from till its dust, Rudy said bluntly. Delta blinked. There were types of blood elementals? Besides A-type, B-type. Delta shook those thoughts away and focused. If not, then it's a spirit type. That's the most manageable and more complicated. I'll take this little guy to town, and if it's a golem, I can ask Japes. If not, I'll have to see Madame Goo. She would know the most about spirits because she's really bit her tongue, as she suddenly remembered something. Goo is cool. She'll take a look, Rudy amended. Odd, but Delta didn't push it. Thank you for helping us, I mean, Delta said and bowed her head with gratitude. Being so close to her core really made talking to Rudy easy. Delta's smile lasted a few seconds before her mind replayed the last sentence over and over. Talk to Rudy. Talk to Rudy. Talk to Rudy. You where? Delta's voice trailed off. Davina knitted a sleeve with a sigh, and the shoe drops. The frog mumbled, and a bird. Rudy was also grinning. Evidently, she wasn't going to say anything about it. But now the Delta had noticed. "Hello, Del. Nice to finally see a face to go with the madness." Ruli winked. Delta slowly put her hands over her mouth. Stupidly, she felt scared that if it was wasted words now, any words, her chance would be gone and her chance for human contact would vanish. Ruli raised one brow. "You nattered on before, no different now. Just two friends chatting after rooting out an evil bonies in your basement. Just be yourself," Ruli assured her. "The mushrooms weren't my idea," Delta blurted out, so fast that it was almost as fast as a magical spell broken by a masterful wizard in the heat of battle. Ruli blinked. "But they're your thing. Everyone knows they got shrooms for days." Ruli scratched her nose. "The monsters were all accidents, but good ones, and the system made me gamble on Bob and the others. I didn't know Waddles was an overlord duck." Delta just talked. Her words raged up like a storm and she couldn't stop. "I want to be a good person, and I want to keep making really strong things, but then I kinda like them, but I also really want to make a home, but I keep digging things up, and you need to bring that grim kid back so that I can chew him out for calling my dungeon lame." Delta was running out of air, but she pressed on. "Dio true, pure, for this world, spiders, handle, explosion, not my fault. Not my fault, I'm just a girl, doing her best." Delta's chest heaved, and she slid down to her knees to breathe heavily. "That's fine. You're doing a good job," Ruli said simply and tried to pat her shoulder. The touch lasted a few seconds before it broke apart as her hand went through Delta's chest. Ruli stared at her hand sticking out of Delta's torso. "Usually, I ask for consent before being this deep. Sorry about that." Ruli withdrew her hand and grinned. Delta smiled in appreciation of the bad humor, but the air suddenly felt cold, as if the sun had fled and the cold earth surrounded them. "Insist you desist molesting my mother." Davina towered up from behind Delta. Ruli stood, crossed her arms. "But we've slept together, and I've just been inside her. I gotta at least buy her lunch or talk about her proper suitor for taking her on dates." Ruli said in mock horror. Davina's tone could have made ice look hot. "My mother has no time for thugs. She has children to look after and chaos to cause," Davina thundered. Delta was very small between the two giant women and began to crawl towards the door, to the safety of men. She was not dealing with this. She was panicking, wondering how to escape without being noticed because the door was shut. Her mind clicked and she nearly slapped herself. She phased through the door as the feast hall. Delta was going to forget that she could fly next. Most of her monsters sat in what was, once, the feast hall. Delta froze mid-crawl to stare. This was still the feasting hall of some sorts, but geez, Sis really let the system fritz out big time. Long tables with garish orange cloth were covered in basic plates and rabbit, bacon, sausage, mushroom soup, mushroom toast, fried mushroom, and a large platter of ham sandwiches, along with some freshly wrapped chocolate bars. They looked all to be shaped like the front entrance, and labeled simply read as Delicious Deltas, Big and Milky. Delta hoped to God that no one shortened that brand name. A nearby table was punched bowls of various fruits blended down to pure juice, and there was even a slow-moving fountain of honey with crackers that bred sticks to dip in for coating. From the ceiling hung a low banners and blazing mushrooms on them. The mushrooms looked like they were about to reach a new level of power. Delta had a sinking feeling that was a symbol of sorts. She managed to get far enough to see another table with various selections of sushi and freshly sizzling fish on plates. Most of them looked to be copies from her first floor. The fish was covered in a light drizzle of some kind of oil and was made of the surface of the meat, looked just juicy and plump. It had all been deboned with great care. Someone had taken the time to rub various herbs and her second floor on the various rabbits and fish to make the room fill with a smoking meat aroma that followed the light of herbal scent. For sides, the dungeon provided mashed potatoes and various tiny silver pots of thick gravy that hinted at beef and pepper. Delta forgot about hiding and just stared in wonder. Another table showed off fresh apples. Next to them were cooked apple fritters and some attempt at a hot apple crumble. Another punch bowl filled with apple juice and looked pure and untouched by anyone. Next up was a table covered in various birds of the jungle. The sheer amount of dishes that displayed some form of birds being grilled, fried, sliced to match the ham sandwiches, and even marinated in various mushroom sauces, filled the hall with the most amazing scents Delta had ever smelled. She wanted to open the menu, but the sound of animals came from behind. She saw Rail, Squaw, Billy Num, and Jib all cheering as Jack was lowering into the honey fountain, and they all began to count to see how long Jack would last. Dear Lord, she had made enough men to make a fraternity house. She turned, and sure enough, made with royal honey, Delta's dungeon now boasted honey mead. The label was simple. Lizard's hooch, every sip is sweet and like Delta. Delta would appreciate the compliment if dozens of bottles littering the floor weren't all empty. Idiots, aren't they? Came a gruff voice. Delta spun to see Farah standing there, her face unamused, and she eyed the mess. You left your bar, Delta said in amazement. Farah gave Delta a long look which suggested that she had just added Delta to the idiot list. No, I expanded. The kitchen here is part of the dungeon now. It connects to my bar, and a road the dumb waiter down here, she explained, and scowled as Jack hit the floor when struck it. So, this is all on your menu now. Delta looked around with a slight drool. Farah nodded. Buffet style down here. Thought you might want these idiots to call the adventurers to get a reward for beating Wyam. The sour cow. It's unlimited, so it is not a hassle to respawn. Besides, I got a helper now, Farah said smugly. Her face fell as she barked at Jeb, who was stuffing his face with mashed potatoes. Jebediah, that soup's boiling over, she yelled, and the troll jumped in alarm before he turned, stomping his way back through a large door in the corner of the room. Rocks for brains, but he follows orders like a soldier. He can only cook what a troll soup gruel, so it's going to take some time for me to train him up to handle proper mushroom soup, Farah admitted. Delta just stared. Isn't that just boiling mushrooms in veggie mix and water? She asked in confusion. That made Farah's face turn dark. Should be. I had to kill what crawled out of Jeb's pot the last attempt, she grumbled. Delta had no words for that. Mina gathered her clones into one as they finished emptying the dishes into the sink. She watched as the usually quiet bar owner, Nibs, paced behind the counter. That was odd. Very odd. You okay, boss? She asked, and it split into three once again to serve a drink, collect more plates, and to talk. 3 pairs of eyes, 3 lines of thoughts, 3 people she could be forever. But she pulled the thought away and focused on Nibs. The slightly round man with the beard that, if one peered too closely at it, might assume that he had his own little beard. Nina had offered to cut it once, and she had been barred from her own place of work for a day. Nibs was someone who was blunt, honest, and looked like he'd been custom-made for the business. Nina wasn't even sure that was a joke. The man never slept. The man didn't eat. The man didn't even eye her rear like all the other jobs. That's why Nina always acted like the bar was alive, listening, using the puppet in the form of Nibs to talk to people. The man looked so perfectly stereotypical, like a bar owner, that he couldn't be real. Nina had stayed mostly because of the good pay, the way Nibs didn't tolerate any abuse aimed at her, and to solve this mystery. Oh, and it being the only bar endurance helped as well. Sure, there were other establishments that served drinks, and milk bottle for one, but it wasn't a bar. It was a public milk house. It didn't upset Nibs for some reason. Got a new one. Petty, out of the way, but it's going too fast. It's like a slap in my face. I can feel when its menu is off balance. No veggies or duck. The tables are all too new. Sets my teeth on edge. Only a few different drinks. What an arrogant place. But the owner. Nib stared out at the window, and Nina waited for him to speak, baffled at the random facts that he was pulling out from somewhere that he had never been. That owner has a real bar spirit. Usually new pups make me feel a toothache. All sore and endless, but her. Nina, this uppity newbie is making my heart race. She loves her bar, Nibs declared. He turned and pulled something out of the drawer and began to scrawl on it. Chris is due for a drink. Grab him, or that idiot friend of his, Seth, and go spelunking. I need you to deliver this letter." Nibs ordered. Nina took the sealed note between her 2 fingers as if it was going to bite her. "But what about work?" Nina protested. Nibs eyed the 2 clones. "Just leave them. I'll wait for you," he promised, and ushered Nina towards the oncoming quiz. The wizard looked furious as his face was covered in soot and burn marks. His mana flashed and threatened to explode as he glared at them. Everyone in town was going to be suffering the same soon. New levels of mana meant the previously limited powers would grow. Even Nina was in danger from that, and she had no desire to return to the mess that she had been before. She might have to train to get her mana to higher levels before long. Nina, the hive mind, was not a cute thing to see in action. "No, whatever it is, no." Chris shut them down and stalked to her bar. Nina wasn't sure she imagined stools slightly moving to avoid him, or drinks pouring themselves before Nibs actually touched the lever. Okay. She needed someone whose mana hadn't plummeted and was now rising like a dragon on gnome crack. She went looking for Seth and prayed that he was grasping the language a little better. "You wish to give letter to new drink place," Seth said after a moment. Nina's hopes rose, and then she carried on. "I think my boss has a crush on the new place and wants me to scope it out for his darling," Nina admitted. "Your leader wants to crush the new drink place. Scope, as in watch. He wants to see new drink crushed for dancing to be," Seth said in alarm. Nina was quiet for a moment and then shrugged. "You know what? It's not the right crushing, but I get Nibs would do that if he doesn't like what he hears. But all you need to do is come with me to deliver the letter." She beckoned him. Seth waved to Isanella, who was watching them with delight in her eyes. Seth was having tea with her. What they would talk about, Nina had no idea. "May I come? Dio is out with his friends and I have nothing else to do," the woman asked. Nina blinked and tried to remember if she had ever heard this woman speak before. "Sure, open party. Looking for a healer now, but we'll take a bard," Nina joked. Isanella thought about it. "Delta is a sweet girl. I doubt we need a healer. I can spend time with Maestro and practice my new instrument," Isanella said brightly, and the room felt melodical and sweet, as if her mood was infectious. She plucked the lute and looked to have the mushrooms on the mind when being made. Seth peered when the mushroom motif had nodded. He patted his stomach and growled. "Round squishy headbutts make good food mounty party." Seth beamed. Nina nearly spat out her tea. "Can't you reach him or find someone who can help him learn the local words?" Nina asked the smiling woman. "I can understand his music, but I'm no good at teaching. We have to hum at each other, and sometimes he slips into the tongue of magic, which I know a little bit of," Isanella explained. "I just feel like he's going to say something bad and the dungeon, and it's going to be my fault," Nina sighed. The petite woman giggled. "Dungeons understand all languages that are in common use, most creatures, and even most intense. Most just don't care to respond." Isanella stood and grabbed the yellow cardigan. That was news, and Nina leaned forward, and the woman kept talking cheerfully as she began to pack lunches for them all. What a mother! Dungeon cores take the ambient mana, and a lot of world's mana flow on in the wind in the form of dense places. In a lot of areas, the mana mingles and knit and whispers words to each other, spreading itself so dungeons learn more about many things. Isanella packed the food into a basket and covered it with a red cloth. "Mana talks," Nina said doubtfully. Seth merely hummed, and that made Isanella giggle. "Seth thinks you sound like a negative Nancy. I've been such places where mana mingles and spreads to the corners of the world. Such places are called ley lines. They are powerful, and if you use a map, many dungeons are built along one or more ley lines." Isanella hummed as she spoke. Nina frowned. "What about here?" she asked. "For a powerful thing like these lines, Durance sure has been tapped dry." She pointed out as they began to walk down the street. They made Isanella frown. "Our dungeon seems to have been built on a dead line." The woman went quiet. "How does a line die?" Nina pressed on, and looked what she got was haunting. "It's cut open and sucked dry by evil." Nina only had one thing to say. Bummer. Rudy left with enough bacon and eggs to feed an army, let alone made Delta feel better about helping pay the woman back for coming to her aid, like some demonic superhero. It wasn't nearly enough, and despite Rudy only going to the first floor to drink, on the house, dungeon, it still meant Rudy was closer to leaving than hanging out. Rudy's demon nature, whatever it was, let her see Delta far more clearly than she suspected normal folks would. After an endless time of no real sleep, other than times when the floor appeared or she broke the system, Delta was beginning to miss talking to people that she hadn't made or found in her basement, or unearthed in some spooky circus or exploded down a soul level. Delta pursed her lips. It felt like so much time had passed when really, the 8 hours of sleep that she had no longer needed just made everything go on forever. As soon as Rudy reached the second floor, Wyan, too lost in her own world to even care about the woman, Delta felt the system rushing to bombard her with notifications. Order, order, one at a time, she barked, and all the appearing boxes hastily shifted into a neat queue. The first one was interesting. She hovered it in the air and got ready for some reading. Where's New? Shouldn't he be her secretary for all of this? Planning a small-scale war, unless you want to deal with the convincing swar that he needs to aim or jib that he needs to think longer than 3 seconds before rail to stop flexing. Delta eyed the box and New appeared and grabbed for the first one. Thought not. The first menu simply gave her the results of reaching the 3rd floor. 3rd floor, Silent Fortress existing structure plus. A series of connecting halls, rooms, and stairs that challenged an adventurer to adjust from the tricky creatures of the 1st floor and the wilderness of the 2nd. The floor can be considered an even battleground, but those foes can place in their path do not have to be human. Maximum mana 280, DP 536. Monster unlocked, Troll, 1 slot left opened. 2nd monster found, dungeon can now make gargoyles. I have no memory to consenting to this. Delta accused. The box shied away, but didn't do anything but give her a menu of new beasts. Gargoyles, stone demons of the sky, ceiling. Not to be confused with grotesques, which are simply look pretty. Gargoyle are walking animated statues that can switch between the earthly flesh form and the stone form that is completely without energy or life, making them expert ambushers. The energy of the gargoyle is usually a spirit or a magical core, but in this case, the goyles merely eject their mana selves from their body and cannot be seen or harmed. In this state, the gargoyle's physical body are treated like objects in the dungeon space. It was how they were absorbed. Summon, common stone gargoyle, a basic gargoyle with various decorations and themes to their shape. 20 mana. No further evolutions unlocked. It was a big info dump and Delta summed it up in her head. Potential rock monsters, be stone or not, and ambush people. They're aware because funky magic business may look weird. Easy peasy. Delta should do this dungeon gig herself. It was the easy... Oh wait. Delta made a note to summon a gargoyle soon to test out how she felt about them. Thinking about the lure lizard and the slimers still repulsed Delta to a degree, and she was suddenly hit with a weird feeling that time flying past. She thought for her first floor, and the idea of changing any of it. The loss of those memories, her time there, made her chest tight. If she just messed with things, and then what she had done and what she had felt would be lost and the weird time lapse. No, thank you. Minor upgrades and keeping the foundation shrouded nice for now. So, if the goyles, Delta's name for them, turned out to be a bit crabby, then she would keep the lone one and move on with more trolls. More jibs seemed fun. The next notification was the feast hall and her battle inside of it. Well, Fran's battle. Delta just cheered and fiddled with some options, turning on a cheat code by accident. Enemy captain defeated. Core mana leached. Corruption resistance improved. Awarded 100 DP. Please defeat more. Sis, I'm no warrior. Just give me a task to do. She protested and the box fizzled and then faded. Relieved, she focused on the next. The feast room has been converted into the banquet hall. But that's just the same room with a different name, Delta pointed out. The box twitched for a moment. The feast hall has become the snack bar. But now we're lying. No bar here, sadly, Delta said, and the box began to twitch a little faster. Please insert name while system goes for a coffee break. Delta rolled her eyes at Sis's sass before she mused. Something catchy, something Delta. Farah looked up from her task at dodging blinding beams of light from the starlight mushrooms as she tried to force them into a cooking pot. The dumb waiter labels had changed to show the new name. Free Heel Hall, really. I guess extra work for Farah is a bit mouthy. The goblin grumbled as she connected the dumb waiter began to leak the thick black sludge that Jeb's latest attempt at cooking. She sighed and got her broomstick. Free Heel Hall, or Free Heel for short, just felt right in her head. It was like the free healing spot before the boss in some games. Delta was sure that her food, while delicious, could not heal actual wounds. She eyed the table and rubbed her hands in anticipation. Not yet, but I've managed weirder things, she admitted. And how hard could it be to replace the typical herbs with medicinal ones? Wine mixed with magical grapes, cake that didn't make you fat. Okay, that last one may have even been beyond the system. Still, a girl could dream. She hummed and twirled along the hall as she hummed. Maestro, have you made it down yet? She called aloud, and from underneath the tables came a catcall whistling. Not even the worst monsters of this world could keep me from taking center stage. How can I please your ears today, mother? Maestro sang, and the floor vibrated. I can call you Betty, and Betty, when you... She waited, interested to see how far Maestro had learned her music. Maestro began to toot a flute, and the floor hummed. Call me Owl. A fine choice if I do say so myself, Madame Betty. Maestro took off and the song filled the halls, and Delta giggled, skipping along to the beat that she planned. There was something fun about filling this place with music and laughter. A tiny slap of silence nonsense. Take it away, Master Owl, she laughed. She could feel the manor slowly taking over as the garden beyond the hall. Soon there would be even more space to work with, but she tapped her foot, and the maestro's jolly voice and she beat was on point to the song that she remembered. Her eyes flicked, and the menu followed her. Free Heel Hall, a mighty feast for the brave and victorious. A hall filled with various foods made of substance found in the dungeon. Upgrade. Reduce cooldown of food reappearing 10 DP. Allows new recipes to be crafted and added to the menu by monsters or guests. 3 DP. Allow the second floor hidden jungle garden to produce veggies and various fruits to be added to the menu. 15 DP. Add monster meat meals from defeated foes absorbed by the dungeon. Vegan options available if treants and dryaps are absorbed by the dungeon. Pretty tame options. Delta was a little bummed not to see all Hall Guardian, but she assumed that she was getting some version of the breakfast monster meant for the feed the family. Some together breakfast beast. Truly, the most important meal of the day, and the deadliest. Speaking of potential guardians and purchasing, Delta whistled innocently as she floated towards the stairs. Feeling nostalgic over the first floor had made her remember that she had forgotten about the chance to purchase a random guardian for the troll well that connected the Waddles Pond on the fort room. She flew past the singing worm and blushed a little as she noticed Maestro was broadcasting her song of choice dungeon-wide. Ah well, the bees were partying it up and Bob was wiggling so hard that he was like one of those dancing things outside of car shops. The paradise birds of the jungle and the various rabbits and tricks foxes were also hooting and yipping along to the song. Honestly, she felt like a summer princess that could fly and summon monsters, but still, it was a fun feeling. One shot up of the first floor and peeked in on Fran, who was sleeping in his cave against Bacon's stomach. She really was going to make Fran a decent room once Rudy stopped drinking and left the dungeon. Speaking of the giant woman, who Delta regarded as her closest friend from outside, she was enjoying Delta's reward of free drinks with great pleasure. Then pow, sent the fool flying as hard as it exploded. Rudy told the blank-faced Farah, I keep feeling like I should be responsible and cut you off, but if you get drunk enough, you might drop more tips that aren't rabbit bones and naughty jokes. Farah mused. Rudy burped loud. Jukebox monster, turn up the tunes. Rudy said with a huge grin. Maestro seemed only too happy to blast the flute solo as requested. Rudy cheered and went back towards the second floor with a drink to bask in the fox sunlight. Perfect timing. Maestro, line up, jump in the line next. Delta whispered, and the mushroom glowed with pleasure at the request. She snuck past and floated down the tall wall to see the dark tunnel. She looked around at the high, guilty expression before pulling up the menu and hovering her finger over the Guardian buttons. Random. A gamble. Delta moaned at her lack of self-control before she giggled and paid the cost. The light gathered in the hallway submerged the tunnel. Orange, of course. The ball of light burst and something fell on the ground, splashing heavily as it was the water before settling. Delta had prepared herself for many tentacles or heads. Or heck, she would have bolted at the first sign of something with suckers. Instead, a roundish purple thing lay there in the water, mostly settled around it, submerging it beside a tiny island of shell. It was a clam. A giant purple clam. Delta blinked at the innocuous monster and prodded it. "Hello?" she called. Her touch slightly rocked it, and the bubbles began to ripple to the surface as the seam of the two halves began to open. Delta leaned in eagerly. There was a pause, and then the shell snapped open to show a pile of coins, pearls, gems, and a collection of terriers. The shine and luster of it was all spectacular. Delta was so shocked that she leaned in closer. This was when the pile of coins shifted to reveal a grinning skull. The bottom of the shell was filled with various skulls, and the top of the shell became rigid with barbed teeth. It snapped down. Delta screamed and phased away with a yelp. The monster lowered itself into the silt and grew bubbles out that Delta guessed was an attempt to be cute. She glared and opened the menu. Sunken treasure mimic. Its gleam leads many a greedy person to a watery grave. It snaps to show affection. Not many survive to appreciate it. Affection by eating people. Delta was not sure how to come across. The clam opened up again to show Delta its treasure and tried to entice her to jump in as if to join the collection. You can't help yourself, can you? News ringing made Delta turn, trying to hide the clam with her thin form as she laughed nervously. Control? Me? Of course. I didn't summon a man-eating treasure chest, she laughed nervously. You know you're still see-through, right? Delta knew this and turned her nose up at the idea of being caught. It's got an intelligence of a dog. Do not fault it for being eager. I know that you want to be liked and all that mush. New floated over to the clam, shied away from the box as if afraid. Cheerful, are you mad you didn't get some murderous siren or a sea snake? Delta asked. New turned, looking blank and then floating away. Your awareness of your family is astounding. I don't need those, I just need to make you gamble more. The results speak for themselves. The mimic will guard any treasure thrown down here, and with the tenacity of goblins eyeing free drink. Handy for its purpose. Delta could see that. With its now exposed pink tongue sticking out of its side of its shell, it was actually adorable, despite trying to show her affectionate moments beforehand. Honestly, it wasn't a bad compared to some of the things Delta had made. She talked it up to the first floor normal vibes. She just needed to do one thing. Delta opened her menu and used the various ideas to form a new item. It took a band of iron, some glass orbs, coiled metal, and a blue paint and cloth. New seemed speechless as the clam paused to admire the googly eyes that bobbed back and forward and the band worn on the headband. Perfect, Delta nodded. The point is to fool people into thinking it's not a monster. You understand this, right? Ah, but that's the plan. They'll think it's too obvious and decide it's a trap or a trick and not suspect it actually is a trap. Delta crossed her arms. Sure, shall we call it Prince Clamorance, or Sheldon, or Clamrice? New was being sarcastic, but Delta chose to ignore it, and the bigger person. Room Guardian, Calamity has been summoned. End of chapter. There is no epic loot, only puns. Chapter 89. Split opinions on banned books. In Delta's honest opinion, 1 troll is good, 2 surely must be great. It was, sort of. Delta watched as the second troll appeared. This one smaller, but wider. The cave troll finished materializing, and Delta was confused when she thought she saw seaweed clumping together on the top of the troll's head. Jeb peered in with wide and excited eyes. The troll turned and grumbled. What are you staring at? the troll growled. Jeb moved in closer. Sister, you're in my ma's dungeon, Jeb proclaimed. Sister? Sister? Delta tried not to stare, but there was nothing that would consider human femininity in the troll. Then again, Delta was using human eyes. Maybe to a troll, this monster was a bombshell. I know that, Rockhead. I know where I am in it. And I ain't dumb, eh? The troll roared, and Jeb smiled as if it was a great joke. He reached forward with a pet of the troll's head, and then there was a crunch as the troll buried her fist into Jeb's grinning face. You stink of troll soup. Don't mess up my hair, she warned. Jeb said something, but his nose was being flat made it harder to understand him. The troll wore a large shoulder-to-knee cloth thing that might have been a sheet, but the dirt and mushrooms growing on it, the twin shoulder straps and the thick pockets made it seem almost homemade. The troll finally noticed Delta, and her bravado and anger turned silent and blinking. Hello, Delta said slowly. Hi, Ma, the troll mumbled. There was a long pause. I don't want to share a cave with this idiot. Can you make another cave? The troll asked, and Jeb blinked. I can sleep outside, he offered. I'll wake and find your big butt blocking the cave entrance, came the retort. I'll work on it, but you need a name. Anything you want to be called, or? Delta began, and the troll crossed her arms. Skull Crusher. Delta closed her mouth, and she could almost feel new smug amusement hovering nearby. That name was a bit, misleading. Delta tried, and the female troll went to inspect the troll room, noticing the old furnace and anvil. Man-eater, came the next granted a suggestion. How about Daisy or Rose? Terra or Gaia? Delta walked around so the troll was looking at her. Again the troll looked away as if she didn't want to look at Delta. Heart Nasha, she suddenly exclaimed. That seemed to make the troll happy, and Delta knew that she would have to be clever here. Well, just a little clever. Sure, Delta began, and Swan nearby made a choking noise in protest. But we'll shorten it to, Nashi, because nicknames are good too. Delta nodded. The troll thought it over. I like it. It's like a secret. I'm Nashi. The troll bobbed her head, and the seaweed-like hair bobbed. Nashi and Jebediah, Jeb crowed, and he almost got another punch for his efforts. Nashi grabbed a very old rusty knife from the blacksmith table, which had become part of the room now, then cut her long hair shorter. Getting in my eyes, she complained. The action actually was interesting, and Delta watched her hair begin to bobble and grow almost straight away. Troll regen was a bitch, it seemed, and it would be a bad hairstyle. The chopped parts wilted, and Delta noticed that they hadn't faded. Nashi chopped and chopped, but the hair kept growing like weeds. Hey, you mind not shedding everywhere? Swa yelled. Nashi glared down at the gob. Shut it, I sit on you, she snarled. Swa scampered up her back and tusked at the measly growing hair. You never heard of maintenance? Watch. He commanded, and gathered a hair with firm hands and began to tie it into a ratty knot, with one overlapping strand acting like a hairband. Saw that human woman in leather pants that came with Kemi, the good doer. She had her hair up like this. Swa said and admired his work. Delta smiled, but didn't say anything as Nashi slowly felt her knotted hair. It held up, but it did look like she had to stuck her head into a blender. It's good, you live for now, Nashi complimented Swa. Yeah, growled the gob who can control fire. Swa waved this off, but he snorted from the shadows. Control's a strong word, he mocked. Delta was already summoning a cloth long enough for Nashi to learn how to tie her own hair up. Jeb watched the scene and rubbed his own bald, rocky head sadly. Delta sadly did not have a toupee to conjure, unless she could make something out of boar hair and mushroom fibers. Best not to think about it before Sis just did that. So, you know what to expect. The third floor isn't safe yet. Delta began to explain. Nashi retreated to the cave to experiment with tying her hair up without being seen, but her voice flooded in like a swarm of bats. Undead idiots, and some quite bugger. Just smash anyone that comes from the side unless they talk or something. If they come from the stairs, ignore them or rob them. Nashi responded, sounding bored. Well, don't rob them unless they're jerks, but basically. So, welcome to the dungeon. Delta called. This was one of the awkward summons. The breaking down of the monster creation system had her own general weirdness was enough to either make the smooth summons or awkward ones. There was the third type that resulted in Delta babbling at the bottom of a pond. Delta did her best not to think of those summons. "Thanks, I'll find something to do. I hear you like us monsters being busy, or something." Nashie's voice toned down in a quiet, thoughtful sound. "Just take your time. I'll let you settle in with Jeb and come back later." Delta could feel almost an unsaid request to give the new troll some space. This was an awkward one, all right. She'd come around. Delta suspected having her, Jeb, the gobs knew, and was a lot of pressure of having the moments after being created. Nashi needed time just to think. Delta could appreciate that and even encourage the monsters to think. She stood in the map room with a serious expression. Far too serious. Delta looked around the room and could almost see the shadows waiting for Delta to forget to have fun or to be too grim. That was not good. She pondered her options. Her mana was soaking into the garden beyond, where it would slow down even the mob to absorb, and 7 rooms beyond as she cleared them out, one by one. Still, the garden was getting absorbed rather quickly and cleanly. A terrible foe, a great monster. It rose up at them and towered like a demon in their light. Still, not one of them broke formation and turned tail. They were the mighty mana. They would fear no demon, no monster, and certainly not this gazebo. They took the archers together, and a few of the men fell in the gaps below. Several screams of fallen comrades were being absorbed by the Mana Legion below, and onwards with the climb with the demonic garden accessory. It began to twitch, and they tried to run, finally revealing the true form, but the magically enchanted furniture was still just an object. It lacked life force, and thus was prey. All for the dungeon, all for Delta. Delta was kind of glad that she wasn't forced to watch the process. It would drive her to tears with boredom of things just being converted. Best to make the most of her time. She opened up her map menu and smirked at the Guardian option. It was almost unhealthy how close she was to doing these two options together, but the security of the 3rd floor and preventing jerks from accessing the map was just as important. She purchased the Guardian option, and the light flashed in the room before it rocketed down the hall and into the library. Delta blinked, not sure why another room was being involved, but she was followed it, actually running in her excitement. The connection between the map and the library grew tighter, and every book on every library shelf was shaking as Delta phased into the room. Then it all went still. Delta narrowed her eyes. "As the dungeon master, I command you to reveal yourself." She flung her hand forward, giddy and nervous. If she got another mimic, that would be a bit of a letdown. Like a switch that had been flipped, the books began to rocket off the shelves and a swirl in the air. The actual damn bookcases themselves sunk into the floor to create a wide open space as more and more books mashed together to form a blocky humanoid figure. It stood about 8 feet tall, and the blocky, multicolored covers that made it up its form was constantly shifting and being replaced, except for the lone book that head which had laid upon. The pages were blank, and then 2 black ink dots seeped in from the pages and became visible. Delta stared up at the giant book thing. Libraries. Book transformers in disguise? She guessed. The menu appeared. The Librio power gain from the Visitor Grimm has been used to create the Librio Golem. Librio Golem. This creature automatically gets a copy of any book absorbed by the dungeon. It can replicate any book for guests and those willing to trade. If angered, it can use various pieces of knowledge in books once, before that book is destroyed. They will not reappear until the golem has respawned. Examples of powers the golem has access to: Candle Igniting Spell, Tree-Tied Knot Ropes, Pig Guts Expelling Curse, Tea Ceremony Rituals. Note, the book seems to be mostly about throwing boiling leaf juice into people's faces. 35 different versions of Fireball, 4 of them explode upon the cast, and another 2 fly backwards. Several hunting traps gained from Ruli's journal, along with ways to use paper cuts to kill a man. The golem only has access to 10 books upon spawning for the fight. These books would be chosen at random. This may be increased by absorbing rare books. It can also crush a man by the sheer strength if it catches them, but it would prefer not to stain its pages. Grim, you buffed my monster. Delta mumbled, but then tried her winning smile. Hello, welcome to the dungeon. Wow, saying that twice in less than 10 minutes is a bad sign, Delta said as the last part of herself. The golem didn't move. It didn't speak or write words on his Facebook. Delta held up a hand to collect herself from the unintentional pun and had to fight a smile. The golem didn't respond or move. She eyed the menu and it began to add more details. Intelligence is of a basic golem. It also has a higher weakness to fire, as paper tends to have. That two monsters had huge weaknesses to fire, first the trolls and now Bookie. Delta would honestly be upset at such a weakness on the floor, but she winced. Anyone who made it this far on the first floor after using fire would probably be too traumatized to even risk setting anything else on fire again in her dungeon. Bookie broke apart suddenly and the shelves returned. Without an invader, she guessed that even a golem like Bookie would get bored. At least if someone wanted to use her map, they would have to trade knowledge or burn Bookie to ashes to even get at it. That made Delta feel better, knowing that people she considered guests and friends would be safe. Still, she wanted the garden secure and the feast hall ready to be defended before she urged the monsters onwards. Delta floated to the kitchen, eager for the room converting to be done. The gazebo had invaded them well until now. All of this corner was now Deltian. Their hard work had been beaten this monster's sheer tenacity to live. Foolish. When it had fought hard, the mana would go beyond hard. It would reach the pinnacle of Delta mana and push on. No mere gazebo could halt their advance. First the dirt, then the mushrooms, then the dead, then this gazebo, then, one day, very soon, the gods themselves would be a feast. If Delta, the Great Mother, wanted a god, of course. The gazebo reared back as they charged, aiming to nibble it atom by atom. Their hearts beat as one as they destroyed their foe. Victory. The thing writhed, and just when they nearly had it down, it kicked hard off the wall, flipping like a table to a far-off door, crashing through it with a great accuracy. The mana went still. Then it hobbled like a furious foamy bath. Coward. The mana reared back and charged at the door, but the gazebo, scared and missing two archers, kicked the door shut. The clear cut between the two spaces, and Delta made them unable to move on. Monsters. Life, in one form or another, existed on the other side. They had been repelled. They carved that gazebo's image into the very core of themselves. Every atom of Delta would know that gazebo. Know it well, and hate it. You know, gazebos are kind of tacky. I think there's one in the garden. I might get rid of it, Delta told Jeb as he tried to stir blackburn soup. Gazebos sound boring, Jeb agreed, happily, as he sent his sample up the dumbwaiter for Ferret to taste. The black sludge moved and Delta blinked as a lost pygmy mushroom seemed to be trapped in it, and like tar before the lift vanished. Jack whistled. I saw those buggers sneaking down the stairs. They're kind of aggressive, he said. Delta glared at him. They're sweet things. Jeb, don't cook any more pygmies, she chided. Jeb eyed his hand, where about a dozen darts filled to pierce his skin. Can't help it. They took over the cupboard. Got pygmies in the kitchen now, like bugs, but no bugs here because Farah doesn't allow it. Jeb nodded. Delta stared owlishly at them. She stuck her head into the lonely cupboard at the back of the kitchen. A tiny village was being made. The younger leader of the group chittered and made shrill cries at telling a story. Delta got the gist. They had declared this floor a sort of training ground where they sent their true warriors to train and survive against the Black Cook. Delta guessed once they became lethargic enough, they returned to the second floor and sent a new batch to train. It was a holy pilgrimage to a kitchen. The village consisted of a hole in a bucket and various pots and pans being turned upside down in wooden spoons used as bridges. Okay, maybe not as harmless as Data liked to believe. She cleared her throat and the entire village went silent as they stared up at her. "Did you harm Jeb? Or try to?" she asked, her voice sharp. The various tiny cute pygmies bowed their heads and beady eyes sparkled. Delta gathered her whale power and glared. "I will not accept harming Jeb or ruining his cooking. If you are here, you help Jeb, or I swear to every god I remember that I'll make you write an apology note to him," she warned. There was no movement before one by one the pygmies raised their hands and formed a wonky triangle over their heads. Their vision of "your word is law." Delta felt a bit crummy about being strict, but them's the breaks when raising dungeons of monsters. One by one, they trotted out of the cupboard and climbed until they were near Jeb. Jack hastily dove for cover. Jeb blinked and didn't seem alarmed like Jack. One by one, the pygmies raised their hands, and the soft trilling noise began to emanate from the tiny forms until the full-blown hymn and choir filled the kitchen. The song held the people entranced Delta and Jeb. The pitch grew higher until it was a bird song of emotion. Then they bowed, the song ending. That was when chaos happened, and all 10 pygmies shot off to various parts of the kitchen to gather supplies. While the 3 wisest of them studied the recipe, Farah had written a very basic diagrams for Jeb. They pointed for Jeb to start chopping up the bowls and pots as he rolled into position. The pygmies rolled the bowls and pots from the insides like hamsters in a wheel. Delta had a feeling they might have taken this health thing to heart. Oops. The kitchen was soon a circus of jumping tiny mushrooms, with acts of plate-tossing, knife-catching, and Jeb's off-key singing. "I'm on drugs. I'm still a prisoner. Maybe they fished out the mind skinner from the pit." "Nope, don't remember that place," Jack rambled as he eyed the scene. Delta wanted to enjoy the scene, but her senses snapped to something. Guests. She had guests. "Boys, we have guests." Delta gasped. Jeb stopped singing for a moment. "They want to be our guest?" he asked innocently as the knife flew past his face as he was caught by another pygmy. Delta could only smile. Nina could only stare. It was a fancy door. "Any idea whose symbols those are?" she asked Esanella, who stood back after putting the symbols in the right order. The weird, thick-sided triangle glowed orange as the doors peeled apart and granted them access. "No idea. It must be important to Delta. Perhaps we can ask." The woman mused as she held the loot with excitement. Nina noticed that Isanella was less interested in exploring or finding the bar than meeting her new friend. "I foresee the mighty Delta Tube. We must ride on," Seth said with excitement. He pointed to one of the symbols. "Betha, Beta," he repeated and smiled. Nina merely smiled at Seth. Sometimes he made sense, sometimes he didn't. "What is a beta, Seth?" Isanella asked, and they climbed up the stairs and down into the cool air of the dungeon. Beta was how would one talk? Beta was like one thing, then another. Beta grew up a tree and changed like a hunter. He waved one hand. "Sounds like Dabergast," Nina grinned. Seth humoured her before looking distant. "If Delta is strange dungeon, Beta is odd creature. Master knew more, and Quiz not so much." Seth looked around the room and he finally touched the dungeon ground. Nina followed suit, and never having been in a dungeon before, had no idea what it was saw of normal or not. Esanella eyed the door as she wandered over. "This is new," she said, and politely opened the door with the sign Memorial above it. Nina gasped as the wide stone room beyond seemed to hold a distilled melancholy in the air that she entered. The statue of a tall woman peering down at them sadly made Nina's chest feel tight. It feels like the dungeon having a memorial room would be mocking or bragging, but this place is just depressing, Nina said finally. Isanella held up her hand to briefly touch the statue's head. "Because it's genuine. That sort of thing sticks out," she commented. Seth stayed by the door, and he eyed the room with a long look. Nina had no idea what he was thinking. Wizards didn't quite see the world like the other people did. Nina couldn't explain it, but after serving Quisispia for so many years, it was something that she had picked up on. Even Haldi was the same. Two very different people with their ties to magic made them see things and others might not focus on, for better or worse. Quiz once ranted rather drunkenly how the stain on the wooden table was like a symbol of the Eastern Water Kingdom, and that it foretold of the arrival of an envoy. Which Nina had laughed at, and at that very second she clicked that the envoy had come. Seth had come. Nina also knew that wizards were very tricky, and there was a good chance Quiz knew Seth would be coming. They departed the room, and Nina dropped some of her tips in the bar napkin into the tribute bowl. Us underpaid working girls got to stick together, she said quietly, as her form and prayer of a good trip. The things once picked up from listening to people complain about dungeons and adventurers was amazing when no one paid attention to you. Before durance, Nina had picked up most of the gossip and juicy tidbits than the local spy master. But that got to be its own trouble in the end, so Nina ended up with a sleepy place where nothing that she heard mattered and nothing she did could change that. It was liberating. But who knows how that was going to change now, with Durance's dungeon mixing things up. They set off down the tunnel as Isanella strummed a light notes. Just casual flicks on her one lute, but it made Nina's skin prickle with pleasure. Then she hummed, and Nina was a little ashamed that Seth had to hold her arm to stop her from walking face first into a web. Sorry, she mumbled, as she had a quick flash to one of her sleeves, nearly dropping into glass that she was trying to balance. Another view saw herself doing dishes half-heartedly. Not too bad for now, but Nina really had to get back to something went wrong. We must pierce the fabric of Zolrakius, Seth grimaced. The word had to be said with a drop of water falling from a leaf. All purr of tongue, and Nina shared a look with Isanella. Exotic accents were just so fun. They smiled as Seth puzzled the web out. He poked one finger, and Nina, as the thing briskly froze over, as if winter chill had snapped over it. The frost was rapidly spreading before Isanella softly lowered Seth's touch and raised a brow. No need to get so direct. I'm sure if I simply asked and danced, the way will part, she promised. She neared the web and strummed more notes. Sure enough, to Nina's surprise, the web parted like a veil to reveal a silvery spun maze of lines and patterns. More complex than a mere spiderweb should be. Isanella moved in first and held out a hand for a spider to land on. That was something Nina found less magical. Good day, dear spider. May we pass if we do not destroy your lovely webs? She asked, and her voice had taken on an odd lilt, as if speaking in a pitch Nina's human ears couldn't quite keep up with. The spider raised two legs, slowly waltzing in some unheard tune, and Isanella giggled. More and more spiders appeared to climb on the woman, and Nina took 3 large steps back so fast that she nearly left another clone in her place. Seth looked impressed. Like Lady Prince of Beasts, magical and delicious. Beautiful, he mumbled. Yeah, Isanella could be the Lady Prince of whatever as long as she kept the spiders firmly away from Nina. The things vanished and the path was revealed as the spiders pulled the webs to one side, and one spider even pressed down on the thin tripwire hidden in all the web. How innocent and harmless. Maybe there was a spike pitfall connected to it. Nina would take the spikes over spiders, but could just clone enough of herself to climb out and have a traumatic nightmares about it later. Spiders, they stuck to you. They began to slowly traverse the web maze as Isanella plucked a few of the berries and the offering by the spiders. A single spider sat on the thickly webbed throne and applauded their passage through. Did it have a tiny mushroom crown? No, Nina was seeing things. There was a door, and Nina was interested to see the small window appear. Challenge declined, and by asking for passage. Maybe next time. Nina had been so freaked out, she hadn't even seen the challenge box. Oh well, no more spiders. Nina was free until she had to leave, and she could feel a bit dramatic. She might just bash her head in and jump into another one of those bodies. She almost froze. Oh no. She was a dramatic Nina. Damn it! This body was just annoying, like the end of the world bad. Shivering, she opened the door to freedom and froze again, as a tiny form just barely came up to her chest stared up at her. Curly black hair, ruby lips, pale skin of someone who lived underground, bright orange eyes and a shirt made of more web covered his torso. All things were fine. If there was a boy ended in the spider began, when Nina toppled backwards in shock, screeching lightly. "Oh, hello! You're just as cute as my Dio," Isanella said without batting an eyelid. Nina would have gaped at her, but she was too busy being utterly snagged by every web and avoided so far. "I'm taken. Tell my other me's that I can see them stacking," she whimpered. Seth blinked at her, and something lowered from the ceiling. The spider made Nina go very quiet. It eyed her with those pearl-like eyes. It twitched a few legs, and the web around Nina went slack. My, what a rambunctious crowd. Did someone say Dio? How is the lad? A booming voice called from the hall. Nina fled from the web pile as best as she could, and latched onto Seth's magical freezy hands. The being behind the boy spider thing loomed, and it had to lean down slightly to see all through the door. "Ah, Mr. Mushy, you look different," Isanella said, voice alarmingly but happy. "Ah, yes, my dear Lady Isanella. It is a treat to see you traverse these lovely halls once more. I did indeed gain a new powers recently. Enough of that. This is my young charge until Master Swar returns. Kui." He was talking. Mushroom Man introduced the boy spider. The mushroom was talking. Whatever. It only had 2 legs and 2 eyes. Nina bolted for the door. She slipped past, body pressed against the wall as the young spider boy eyed her. It seemed curious about her, mostly staring at her legs with alarm. "Uncle Moosh, someone stole her legs," he pointed. "It's rude to point. Humans only have 2 legs. Think of them as very large goblins, but that with a habit of bathing occasionally," the mushroom explained. As he spoke, the tiny mushroom set into the wall began to play small trumpets and horns as the mushrooms bowed to Isanella and Seth again. "My apologies. I am now Lord Mushy, a special creature of the dungeon. You might remember the charming fellow playing the music as my brother, Lord Mushy seemed to almost jest at Isanella, who was holding her lute with an excited expression. The music died slightly and was replaced by a voice. "Oh ho! Charming, only maybe, brother. Amazingly talented and a superstar, of course. But enough about me. Is that Isanella? Mushy, keep the one that looks like it is ready to cry, and the one that is staring at the pond room like a soulmate. The star of the show must have a co-singer," the deep booming voice announced. Nina gaped again. Were there any mushrooms in this place that didn't make a noise? "What's a soulmate?" Kui demanded coolly of Seth. The man had his eyes locked on the room down the hall. The glowing moss, aided by the glowing mushrooms on the ceiling, illuminated an almost mystical sight. Nina could only see something black and small in the room. A duck, maybe, and that was actually much better than spiders. "Someone you love very much," Lord Mushy said kindly. "Then Mama Delta is my soulmate," the spider boy announced with a pleased expression. Isanella cooed as this, but then she turned to Seth, pushed him towards Lord Mushy, and bowed to the spiders. "I shall come and dance soon. I'm terribly sorry about the webs," the woman said. The spiders waved us off as they made a big show of dethroning the spider and crowning a new leader with a dance. Even the larger spider of white color danced. Kui gasped and rushed into the room to join the party. New webs were strung up, showing the downfall of the giant demon that looked suspiciously like Nina. Lord Mushy closed the door and sighed. Long may she reign. Queen Arena, blade-legged, 7-eyed, mysterious beauty of the Spider Kingdom, second of her name, he snorted, his odd moustache twitching. "I'll explain the semantics of love and soulmates to the young lad when he grows up a tad. No doubt that he will fall in love with some lovely person who comes to the dungeon." He waved away the scene. Isanella bowed once again and actually took off running down the hall before making a sharp left turn and vanishing around the corner. But not all of the relationships need to be of love. Some are just shared passions and friendship, Lord Mushy said, sounding content at Isanella's giggling fading at the door shut. "Is she a potential of pain?" Seth asked with a calm tone. Lord Mushy turned to him, and Nina's jaw dropped the third time. "Forskonata wafari Isanella etstu maestro hipt," the talking mushroom said flawlessly, and Seth's own mouth dropped. Seth fired back an eager question, and the mushroom easily responded. Soon Nina felt lost as they began to laugh and talk about something. Quiss's name was mentioned. She got a little bored and wandered to the pond, as the two followed, still yammering in Seth's language. She couldn't blame Seth. This was the most he'd probably spoken without frustration or misunderstanding in ages. Nina didn't take it personally. She did take it personally when one of her clones began to drink the beer instead of to serve it. She sent a mental slap, and the quick got back to work. She bent down and stared at the duck with the odd rim that made her feel relaxed. This fork, starry night in the woods. She smiled and splashed the water with her fingers. "Here, ducky, want to be petted? Come to big sis Nina," she tutted and whistled. The duck opened one red eye and stood. It waddled into the water and began to float closer. Nina was pleased and reached for it. That was when the air bubbles breached the surface, appearing between the golden fishes and silvery ones. The dark shadow appeared briefly, and then the water exploded as the duck was lifted up into the air by a giant, demonic, hellish, freaking alien, soul-sucking, monstrous worm, shrieking into view. Nina screamed, the worm screamed, and the duck flapped its back to its nest and go back to sleep. Nina was frozen for a moment, ready to split into fury and hunter and leave the drama behind before the worm flopped onto the beach and went still. That confused Nina more than anything. "Bob also wants to be petted, my dear. Be a champ. It likes that spot right under its mandibles," Lord Mushy offered. Nina shakily petted the wet, glittering skin, and the shrieking became a long whine of pleasure. Nina sat there, staring as a hand moved over the skin of her mental faculties, made the other two clones also stare in horror. Drama is screwed. Wasn't nice knowing her, I guess. Nina was going to kill herself when she got back home. End of chapter. That, my friends, concludes this episode. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the author of the story, there will be a link below. If you wish to support this channel, there are multiple ways to do so, which will all also be linked below. But the easiest way would be to subscribe and share my videos as much as possible. And until next time, I hope you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.